Good evening, good evening, good evening to all. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to our 6 o'clock Bible book study here at the Ephesian Primitive Baptist Church. I'm one of your hosts, Cornelius Hill. You see in my hand the emotional, healthy church, a text that you must have in order to follow along with us. We will be using several snippets from this particular text. In this particular, let's say, pedagogical experience, we want to do a double entry. Mhm. For those who remember what a double entry is, want to make sure we do a double entry where we take blocks of text and, you know, kind of paraphrase and pull out the meaning of the text on the other side. Double entries was one of my favorite as an instructional strategy. For those watching, good evening, evangelists. Do you remember what a double entry looked like, Evangelist Moore? If so, put that on the screen. We also had several instructional activities that I want to walk you through, and we will have a PowerPoint presentation ready for you available on next week. So you will see some of the things that we do instructionally. Remember, you must learn to teach or facilitate. Let's say that. The double entry was one of my favorite. Evangelist Moore, do you remember the double entry? I'm waiting for your response. Waiting for your response. Yes, no, maybe. And then do you remember any other activities that you would like to bring to this particular format so that individuals can understand that facilitation and instructional effectiveness is something that you have to be intentional about. So a double entry. Any others, Evangelist Moore, that you want to bring out tonight? Please put it in. We can do double bubbles. We can do synetics. We can do Freyer models. We can do 3, 2, 1s. We can do here's what, now, so what, now what, which deals with inferencing. But I do recall the effectiveness of the double entry. Remember the double entry. Any others? Any others? Any others? With that being said, get your book out, get your Bible out. This is Bible and Book Study. Tonight's biblical lesson will come from the book of Matthew, the book of Matthew. And I need to interact, I need to engage with you, ma'am and sirs, so that you and I can have this wonderful discussion together. And so people can understand that when you in this particular space and place, you have instructional activities, icebreakers. Uh, she said she does not remember the double entry. Which one do you remember as it relates to comprehension? Yes. So that's something we will bring out. Uh, one of the one of my favorite was the Cinetic. Does anybody remember the Cinetic? You had the double entry. You had, of course, you do your acrostics, uh, your anagrams. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Next week, I will have all of this stuff listed for you uh, on another slide so that you can see it. She says she does not remember the double entry. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Matthew 7, put that on the screen. Excuse me, Matthew 17. Matthew 17. Matthew 17, verses 1 through 8, the mountain of transfiguration. We want to pay close attention and make some observations as it relates to emotional maturity tonight, because we're talking about emotional health. We're talking about that and how Peter had to grow emotionally, even when God began to transcend, bring him to another place, bring him to another realm of understanding, open up his eyes. Emotionally, he had to be able to mature as well. So when God takes us up geographically and spatially and spiritually, because anytime God elevates us, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sister Donna, for the text. We must we must understand that when God begins to heighten our sense spatially, spiritually, there must be a heightened sense emotionally. Somebody put that on the screen. When it's spatial and it's spiritual, it's got to be complemented by emotional. You can't have God, well, you can't allow God to take you to another realm without something emotionally happening and not giving yourself the opportunity to grow with the revelation that God has given you. And that's what emotional healthy churches are going to do. It's going to walk us through some discipleship processes to make sure that we identify some things appropriately so we can manage some of these unfortunate episodes in our life. Let's just call it that. Let me read this to you. The sad reality is too many people in our churches are fixated at a stage of spiritual immaturity that current models of discipleship have not addressed. Let me read that to you again. The sad reality is too many people in our churches are fixated at a stage of spiritual immaturity that current models of discipleship have not addressed. The sad reality is too many people in our churches are fixated at a stage of spiritual immaturity that current models of discipleship have not addressed. That's what this book says, page 18. And quote unquote, the link between emotional health and spiritual maturity is a large unexplored area of discipleship. Now, if we had the time to go through our double entry, we would have that on one side of the page and just looking at those statements. And I would need you to kind of rewrite what you think it's saying. So when we talk about people are fixated at a stage of spiritual immaturity, what does that say to you? Literally, when somebody makes a declaration that we are fixated in a stage of spiritual immaturity, that our current levels of a discipleship have not addressed, what is that saying to you, ma'am and sir, who's watching? I need you to respond now. We are fixated at a stage of spiritual immaturity that discipleship is not addressing. What is that saying? What is that saying, ma'am? What is that saying, sirs? How, like a person should come to our churches or our places of worship. And it says, love God with your mind, your body, your soul, your strength. That's emotional. So Jesus Christ was a proponent of emotional maturity. And now we have this particular text, the emotional healthy church, how spiritual maturity, we're fixated on a level of spiritual immaturity that our current discipleship is not addressing. What is that saying to you as a person? You that are on Facebook, you that are on YouTube, you that are on Twitter, talk back to me. I need you to talk back to me. Sure. She said no movement. Let's get a little deeper with the no movement thing. And Shirley, if you want to come on, I can bring you on. The only thing I have to do is send you the link. What do you mean by no movement? What is being said in this statement? That we are fixated at a stage of spiritual immaturity that current models of discipleship have not addressed. How do we assess people's spiritual growth? Like, how do we do that adequately and appropriately? What do we do? What is the battery? What is the assessment tool that's in place to say, hey, Shirley, Cornelius, Donna, whoever else is on, how do you know you're growing spiritually? What do we have in place? Is it church attendance? Is it? Some form of catechism, small group? Is that it? What are you and I, as Christian educators, doing to ensure that our saints, the family of God, is maturing and not fixated on a place in spiritual maturity that we're not addressing? Because we can become immature. Paul said, when I thought, spake, understood, but when I became a man, I had to put away. So spiritual immaturity is a real thing. And tonight we have the book, page 18 and 19. Remember, we're doing double entries tonight. Double entry, just double entry. And I'll show you what a double entry is. Promise you next week so that you will see, okay, I'm reading this passage. Now, I want to kind of put it in my own words and my own terms so that when I see this passage again, at least I have some hooks mentally to assess what I'm doing and learning, and the comprehension will increase. And with comprehension increasing, of course, retention is increasing. So that's a level of, spiritual growth and maturity that we do need. And then in Acts chapter 8, the man said, how can I unless somebody helps me? Yes, Philip, the Ethiopian eunuch. Growth spiritually is non-existent. Growth spiritually is non-existent. Okay. Gotcha. Growth spiritually is non-existent. All right. The response to the ministries and willingness to serve. Okay. So we have growth spiritually is non-existent, and the response to the ministries and willingness to serve. Okay. I like those two. So let's look at another caveat. Sometimes people overcommit to compensate for what they are or what they don't know. They overcommit to promote a spiritual growth and maturity that's really not genuine. And you have to be very careful with people who are overly committed. I'm not asking you to jump into 10 things, because really, if you really want to do your job well, there's an old folklore that said it's a good wise man that teaches 10 men how to do their job well, not one man doing the job of 10 men. So here in this passage, double entry, I'm going to keep saying that again, double entry. Y'all put it on the screen, double entry, so I can put it up there and show you what we'll do the next 3 or 4 sessions, just making sure that we have a instructional activity that will help us assess what we're learning and what we're doing. Double entry. Now, Peter does something in Matthew 17, and I only have like 6 minutes. He does something in Matthew 17 that helps us examine spiritual, emotional maturity. In verse number 4, Peter says this: it is good for us to be here. And that's a marvelous word, the here. It's good for us to be here. That's what he said. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elias. Peter got so wrapped up in the moment, which is not a bad thing, that he committed himself to something he was really physically unable to do because his emotions were not in the right place, or he had not yet balanced his emotions with the experience that he was having with God. And yes, ma'am, yes, sir, you have to balance your emotions with the experience that God is allowing you to have, to experience. You have to learn how to. I need to take some time to talk about just balancing your emotions with revelation, because Peter was so inundated with this unfamiliar transformation that he was willing to sacrifice things that were not needed nor necessary to prove a point. He was willing to sacrifice things that were not needed nor necessary just to prove a point. Peter was willing to sacrifice something that was not needed nor necessary to prove a point. Well, somebody put that on the screen. Not needed or necessary to prove a point, so people can see this. That's how you know your emotions has not matured to the place where they need to mature, when you begin to sacrifice things that's not needed nor necessary to prove a point. Peter said, let us make 3 tabernacles at a place where that work was not even needed. The real work was in the valley with the young boy who was demonic possessed, but Peter was not concerned about the real work because he had gotten caught up in an experience where he had not yet learned how to balance his emotion. I'm telling you, we have to address how emotional church can become. Let me go on and say this on record. Some of us like people because of their behavior in an event called worship. It's attractive. They sing well, they preach well, they move well. It's not until you grow beyond that, which that has really nothing to do with your salvific need or maturity. Their charisma, you like them because they're charismatic. And people start attaching themselves to people because of charisma rather than character. Hmm? 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 Charisma? Woo! The charisma of a person rather than the character has brought you to a place of spiritual immaturity because you get stuck on a person's movement and his or her methods, his or her voice, his or her being visual, but do not know the character of that person. So emotionally, you're on this high because you've been taken there, and that's part of worship. But then you have to have some emotional intelligence and maturity to say, hold on, just because he can shout, just because she can shout, does that give them validation to help shape me? Because everybody who can shout, serve, sing, sow, preach, pray might not have the character to shape me just because you shout at me. Whew. That's why I'm talking about emotional healthy church, emotional healthy discipleship. I can't get caught up on a person just because of rhythm. And now I'm understanding that Peter emotionally was at a great place, but he hadn't matured yet. He got caught up in a moment. And some of us, including myself, we've been caught up in moments that we couldn't get out of because we were strictly emotional. Come on, I'm waiting on y'all. Waiting on y'all. So let's unpack this, and I'm done. Give me 2 minutes. In verse 4 or 5. Thank you, evangelist. Thank you. Let me put that on the screen for the people. In verse 5, while he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. God had to hush Peter with another vision. Woo! To help grow him emotionally. Because Peter's speaking about what he sees. But then God has to, listen, bring something else in his life to hush him, to stop him from getting caught up in an emotional frenzy where his intelligence would be turned off and he will be strictly running on emotions. That's the thing about my emotions. If they're not healthy, they'll turn off my mind. Come on, come on, come on, come on, y'all. Woo! They'll turn off. And I need to think through a process with some intelligence. And I need my emotions at a place where I can still be emotionally in tune, but intellectually aware. Because I will sacrifice something that's not needed nor necessary because my emotions has taken over my intellect. And God has to give Peter a whole nother vision and a whole nother voice to straighten some things out. And oftentimes in our life, I wish y'all double entry, remember, we just working off a double entry tonight. And I promise you next week I have it. You'll see it. We're working off a double entry. Double entry. And then we'll leave the double entry and go to the micro thing. Because people, you need to learn how to take a text and start picking out those things in that text. Shirley, what do you see? Look at what do you see? The cloud was one thing. And we know God operates through clouds. A pillar of cloud by day. God still operates through clouds. He gives Peter another cloud. Here, this is the cloud. And then he said this. He gives him vision. He gives him voice. After Jesus, I guess, and Moses and Elijah are taken away, he gives him a voice. This is my beloved son. That's what he said, right? Hear him. Hear him. And I'm getting ready to close. As our emotions begin to come into some balance, one of the things that we're going to have to do to have some balance in our lives between our emotions and our intellect is we're going to have to hear him. That's the main point right there. If you are void of the voice of Jesus Christ in your life, you will never grow emotionally. And spiritually, you will be stuck and fixated in immaturity because you haven't heard him. When Jesus was ready to shut shop down in the book of Revelation, he said this to the 7 churches: he that have an ear, hear. That's what he said. And he gave a revelation based upon who he was to each church. So it's very important for the believer to understand that if I'm going to grow emotionally in a healthy place and move from my immaturity that I'm fixated on, I'm so I shout and I'm shocked by worship, but I'm not shaped in worship. Come on, Arthur Jackson. I'm shocked. And I shout in worship, but I'm not shaped in worship because it's your emotions. You're waiting for a run. You're waiting for the preacher to do his or her thing. You're waiting for the choir to sway. That's fine and dandy. But there comes a point where you got to hear him. And until you learn how to hear God, your emotions and your intellect, you'll be fixated in a place of immaturity. And I'm closing in good Baptist fashion. I heard the voice of Jesus say, "Come unto me and rest. Lie down, thou weary one, lie down, thy head upon my breast." All right, y'all. Tonight, I'm trying to give you about 25 minutes. I've gone over. Double entry. We're going to work on that. I'm going to show you next week how to take a text, how to put some things together and pull some things practically out of the text so that you can gain comprehension, that you can gain retention. And with retention, with spiritual growth, spiritual fellowship, intimate fellowship, spiritual maturity, and some spiritual fruits that's multiplying in your life, you will move out of that fixated place that keeps you immature because you heard him. I'm closing, but I'm getting happy. Thank you for tuning in to tonight's Bible book study here at the Ephesian Primitive Baptist Church, the Emotional Healthy Church, Matthew 17, verses 4 and 5. Get the book. Make sure you got your Bible. Peace and blessings. See you next week.